I came home from work later than usual, the weight of the day still pressing on my shoulders. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the TV coming from the living room. Rachel, my wife of 5 years, was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. "Hey, babe," I said, dropping my keys on the counter. "Hey," she replied with a soft smile. As I headed to the bedroom to change, something on her nightstand caught my eye. A small, familiar blister pack. My heart stopped when I recognized what it was. Birth control pills. I picked up the pack, turning it over in my hand. This didn't make sense. Rachel and I had been trying to have a baby for 6 months, tracking cycles and planning everything meticulously. Why would she need these? "Rachel," I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. She appeared in the doorway, her expression a mix of confusion and surprise. "What's up?" I held up the pack. "Why do you have these?" Her eyes widened for a brief moment before she laughed, brushing it off. "Oh, those? They're not mine." "Then whose are they?" I pressed, my brow furrowing. "Sarah's," she said, referencing one of her coworkers. "She asked me to pick them up for her on my way home from work. She didn't have time, so I figured, why not?" I stared at her, trying to gauge if she was telling the truth. "And she couldn't buy them herself?" Rachel shrugged. "She was busy, and it's not a big deal." "You're overthinking it, Mike." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe there was nothing more to it. "All right," I said finally, setting the pills back on the nightstand. She smiled and kissed me on the cheek. "You're cute when you're paranoid." But as I changed out of my work clothes, a nagging feeling settled in my chest. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. Little did I know, that moment would plant the seed of doubt that would grow into something I could never have imagined. For the next few days, I tried to forget about the pills. Rachel seemed her usual self. Bright, cheerful, and attentive. She had always been good at easing my worries, and I convinced myself I was overreacting. Work was piling up, and I didn't have time to dwell on it. My boss was breathing down my neck about a project deadline, and I was putting in longer hours than usual. By the time I got home, I was too tired to think about anything but dinner and sleep. Rachel, as always, was supportive. She'd have dinner ready when I walked in and would rub my shoulders while I vented about my day. "You're working too hard," she'd say, her tone full of concern. "I know," I'd reply, forcing a smile, "but it'll be worth it once this project is done." She'd nod, her smile warm, and for a while, I believed everything was fine. But little things started to nag at me. One evening, I noticed Rachel's phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. When I glanced at the screen, she grabbed it quickly, laughing nervously. "Work stuff," she said, tucking the phone into her pocket. Another time, she mentioned a new coworker, but when I asked about him, she waved it off. "Oh, he's just some consultant," she said, her tone too casual. Despite these moments, I buried my doubts, telling myself I was just stressed and overthinking things. Rachel had never given me a reason not to trust her before, and I didn't want to start doubting her now. By the time a few months had passed, the pills had faded from my mind. But something else had crept in. A distance between us that I couldn't ignore. Rachel seemed more preoccupied, more withdrawn. She'd spend hours in her office, claiming she was working late on projects. But when I asked her about them, her answers were vague. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I reached for her hand. She pulled it away, pretending to adjust the blanket on her lap. "Sorry," she said with a small laugh. "I'm just cold." It wasn't the first time she'd pulled away, but it was the first time I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I knew then that I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something had changed between us, and I needed to find out why. The distance between Rachel and me was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the little things anymore, it was everything. She seemed less present, her once warm and engaging demeanor replaced by a distracted coolness. At dinner, our conversations felt forced. I'd ask her about her day, and she'd give short, vague answers. "How's the new project going?" I asked one evening, hoping to draw her out. "Fine," she said, barely looking up from her plate. Anything interesting happen? Not really, she replied, then changed the subject. How's work for you? Her deflection stung. She used to love talking about her job, sharing funny stories about her coworkers. Now it was like she didn't want me to know anything. The distance extended to our intimacy, where we used to share stolen moments of affection throughout the day. Now Rachel seemed to avoid even the smallest gestures. One night, I tried to initiate something more, leaning in to kiss her neck as she sat on the bed scrolling through her phone. She pulled away gently, giving me an apologetic smile. Not tonight, Mike, she said softly. I'm just not in the mood. She rolled over, turning her back to me, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, the space between us in bed feeling wider than ever. The next morning, as she got ready for work, I watched her from the doorway. She spent extra time on her makeup and chose a blouse I hadn't seen her wear in years, sleek and flattering. Big meeting today? I asked, keeping my tone light. Yeah, she said, her voice clipped. We're presenting to a new client. I need to look professional. I nodded, but something about her answer didn't sit right. I'd seen her client meeting outfits before, and they weren't like this. As the weeks went on, I started noticing more inconsistencies. Rachel's phone buzzed constantly, but she was always quick to silence it or place it face down on the table. She began working late more often, coming home hours after she was supposed to, always with a ready excuse about deadlines or last-minute meetings. I tried to push my doubts aside, telling myself I was being paranoid. But late at night, as I lay awake listening to her soft breathing, my mind couldn't stop replaying every strange interaction, every cold glance, every missed connection. Something wasn't right, and deep down I knew it. I decided I needed to start paying closer attention. If Rachel wasn't going to tell me what was going on, I'd have to figure it out myself. The feeling that something was off consumed me. Rachel's coldness, her secrecy, the sudden change in her behavior. It all pointed to something I couldn't ignore any longer. I began to watch her more closely, taking note of every odd moment, every unexplained absence. It wasn't just her phone buzzing late at night or her polished appearance on work days. It was the way she avoided my gaze when I asked questions, the way her smile felt forced, the way she seemed to be somewhere else entirely, even when we were in the same room. One evening, Rachel came home later than usual, her cheeks slightly flushed. Long day? I asked as she dropped her purse on the counter. Yeah, she replied quickly, brushing her hair out of her face. Back-to-back meetings. Exhausting. Her excuse was becoming a pattern, and I couldn't let it slide. Where were you? I pressed, keeping my tone casual. She hesitated for a moment before answering. I told you, at work. Why? You've been working late a lot recently, I said, watching her reaction. Just wondering if everything's okay. Rachel smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't match the expression. Everything's fine, Mike. You worry too much. Later that night, as she showered, I found myself standing in front of her phone. It was sitting on the counter, the screen dark. My heart raced as I picked it up, entering her passcode, the one I knew from years of sharing everything. Her messages were mostly harmless, filled with chats from friends and coworkers. But then I saw it. A thread from someone named AJ. The most recent message read, "Looking forward to tomorrow." I scrolled up, my chest tightening as I read the rest of the conversation. It was light and flirty, filled with inside jokes and mentions of meeting for coffee or lunch. Nothing explicit, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. When Rachel came back into the bedroom, she found me lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone casual. "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." She didn't press further, climbing into bed and turning off the light. But as I lay there in the dark, my mind raced with the possibilities. Who was AJ? And why was Rachel hiding her conversations with him? The next morning, as she left for another busy day, I decided to dig deeper. If Rachel wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd have to uncover it myself. The moment Rachel left for work, I grabbed her laptop from the dining room table. She rarely used it at home anymore, but I hoped it might give me some clues about what was going on. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Her browser history showed searches for local cafes and restaurants, places she'd never mentioned to me. One name kept appearing, Harrison's Bistro. I dug deeper, checking her emails. Most were work-related, but then I found an email chain buried in her sent folder, with the recipient listed as AJ. Rachel, can't wait to see you tonight. Same place as last time. AJ, of course. You looked amazing in that dress last week. Maybe wear it again? The words blurred on the screen as my chest tightened. Rachel wasn't just meeting someone for work or grabbing a casual coffee. This was something more, something intimate. I forwarded the emails to myself, my hands trembling. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but I needed to have everything ready for when the time came. That evening, Rachel came home with her usual smile, acting as though nothing was wrong. How was work? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Busy, she replied, setting her purse down. I'm starving. What's for dinner? I forced a smile, hiding the storm brewing inside me. Thought I'd order something. Pizza sound good. Perfect, she said, heading to the living room. As I watched her settle onto the couch, laughing at something on her phone, I felt a mix of anger and heartbreak. She didn't know it yet, but her lies were unraveling, and I wasn't going to let them go unanswered. The next morning, I took the first step toward confirming my suspicions. I ordered a GPS tracker online, something small and discreet that I could attach to Rachel's car. It felt wrong, invasive even, but I couldn't let my doubts fester any longer. If she was meeting AJ, I needed to know. The GPS tracker arrived 2 days later, and I waited until Rachel was asleep to attach it discreetly to her car. I felt a pang of guilt as I worked in the dark, but the questions in my mind left me no choice. The next morning, Rachel left for work as usual, her smile bright and casual. Don't wait up if I'm late, she said, kissing me on the cheek. Another big day? I asked, trying to sound indifferent. Something like that, she replied, waving as she walked out the door. As soon as she left, I opened the GPS app on my phone and watched the little dot representing her car. She drove to her office, and for most of the morning, the tracker stayed there. I started to question myself, wondering if I was imagining things. But around lunchtime, the dot started moving. I grabbed my keys and followed from a distance. My chest tightened as I watched the tracker stop at a restaurant across town, Harrison's Bistro, the place from her emails with AJ. When I arrived, I parked a few spots away, keeping a low profile. I scanned the entrance, my heart pounding, and after a few minutes, I saw her. Rachel stepped out of her car, dressed in the same sleek blouse and pencil skirt she'd worn that morning, her hair perfectly styled. She looked beautiful, but the sight filled me with dread. Then I saw him. A man stepped out of the restaurant, smiling warmly as he approached Rachel. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with confidence. They greeted each other with a brief hug, too friendly to be professional, and headed inside together. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, my emotions swinging between anger and heartbreak. It wasn't just her meeting someone else. It was the way she looked at him, the way she laughed as they walked through the door. I snapped a few photos with my phone, my chest tightening with each one. That evening, when Rachel came home, she was her usual cheerful self, acting as though nothing had happened. "How was your day?" she asked, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. "Fine," I replied, forcing my voice to stay neutral. "Yours?" "Busy as always," she said with a smile. "You know how it is." Her lies were seamless, her demeanor unshaken. But now I had proof, and soon she'd have to face the truth. The photos from Harrison's Bistro stayed on my phone, burning a hole in my thoughts. Each time I looked at them, the pain felt sharper, but it also steeled my resolve. Rachel had been lying to me for months, and now I had the proof. The next evening, I decided it was time to confront her. Rachel came home later than usual, humming softly as she walked into the kitchen. She dropped her purse on the counter and smiled at me. "Hey, Mike. Long day." "Yeah," I said, my voice even. "Yours?" She hesitated, her smile faltering slightly. Oh, just work stuff. Meetings all day. You know how it is. Her lie was the final straw. I stood up, pulling my phone from my pocket. Rachel, I said, my tone sharp enough to make her freeze. We need to talk. She blinked, her smile fading. What about? This? I said, holding up my phone and showing her the photos I'd taken of her and the man at the restaurant. Her eyes widened and she took a step back. Mike, don't. I interrupted, my voice cold. Don't even try to lie to me again. I've been watching you, Rachel. I know what's been going on. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the fridge. Who is he? I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. Who's the guy you've been meeting behind my back? Her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at the floor, her hands trembling. His name is Andrew, she admitted softly. How long? I pressed. A few months, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A few months, I repeated bitterly. And all this time you've been lying to me, telling me you're working late, pretending we're still trying for a baby. Meanwhile, you've been sneaking around with him. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at me. Mike, I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to happen. Didn't mean for it to happen? I snapped. So what, Rachel? You just accidentally started seeing another man? You accidentally started sleeping with him? Her face crumpled, and the tears spilled over. I made a mistake, she choked out. A terrible mistake. But it didn't mean anything. Don't you dare say it didn't mean anything, I said, my voice rising. You don't destroy a marriage over something that doesn't mean anything. You knew exactly what you were doing. The weight of her betrayal pressed down on both of us, filling the room with an unbearable silence. I stared at her, the woman I'd loved and trusted for years, and felt nothing but cold disbelief. I want you out, I said finally, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Her eyes widened in panic. Mike, please, she begged. Don't do this. I'll end it with him. I'll do whatever it takes. No, I said firmly. You've been with another man, Rachel. There's no coming back from that. Pack your things and go. Rachel stood frozen in place, her tears falling freely now. Mike, please, she pleaded, her voice trembling. I know I've hurt you, but I love you. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but don't throw us away. I shook my head, my jaw tightening. You already threw us away, Rachel. The moment you decided to sleep with another man, you made your choice. You chose him over me, over everything we built together. She flinched at my words, her sobs growing louder. It wasn't like that, she said, her voice breaking. I never stopped loving you. I don't know what I was thinking. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the quiet kitchen. You don't know what you were thinking? That's your excuse? You've been sneaking around with him for months. Rachel, you knew exactly what you were doing, and you didn't care. She sank into the chair at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. I hate myself for what I've done, she whispered. Well, you should, I said coldly, because you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed us. There's no coming back from this, Rachel. Not now, not ever. Her shoulders shook as she cried, but I felt no sympathy. The anger and betrayal were too raw, too fresh. After a long silence, I finally spoke again. You need to leave. Rachel looked up at me, her face pale and streaked with tears. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem, I said, crossing my arms. You made this mess, Rachel. You figure it out. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I'll pack some things, she said quietly. Good, I replied, my voice flat. As she went upstairs to pack, I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. The house felt suffocating, every corner filled with memories of the life we'd shared. A life I now realized was a lie. I heard the sound of drawers opening and closing, her soft footsteps on the floor above. When she came back down, she was carrying a small suitcase. I'll stay with a friend for now, she said, her voice barely audible. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Rachel hesitated by the door, her hand on the knob. "Mike," she said softly, turning to face me. "I know you won't believe me, but I'm so sorry. I'll regret this for the rest of my life." I met her gaze, my expression cold. "Good," I said. "You should." She nodded, her tears starting again as she stepped out the door. The sound of the door closing behind her was final, like the end of a chapter one never thought I'd have to write. That night, the house was eerily quiet. I sat on the couch for hours, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. Rachel was gone, and so was the life we'd built together. But as much as it hurt, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. The morning after Rachel left, the house felt like a ghost town. Her absence was palpable. No clatter of pans in the kitchen, no soft hum of her favorite morning playlist. The quiet was deafening. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the dining table, staring out the window. For the first time in years, I was completely alone. The weight of it pressed on my chest, but beneath the sadness was a strange sense of relief. The lies were over. I spent the day cleaning, trying to distract myself from the pain. I packed up the things Rachel had left behind. Her books, her perfume, the little knickknacks she loved to scatter around the house. Each item felt like a reminder of what we'd lost, but I couldn't let them linger. By the time I was done, the house looked bare, almost unrecognizable. But it also felt like a fresh start. That evening, Greg called to check in. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I don't even know," I admitted. "It's like everything I thought I knew is gone. But at the same time, I'm glad it's over. I couldn't keep living like that." Greg sighed.
"I am sorry, Mom.
"You didn't deserve this. But you're doing the right thing by letting her go." "I know," I said, staring at the blank wall where our wedding photo used to hang. "It just hurts." "Of course it does," Greg said. "But you'll get through it. You're stronger than you think." That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the empty space beside me. For months, Rachel had been lying to me, sharing parts of herself with someone else while shutting me out. The betrayal still stung, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't miss her. I missed the person I thought she was. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of resolve. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could control what came next. Rachel's actions had taken so much from me, but they wouldn't take my future. Over the next few days, I focused on reclaiming my space, both physically and emotionally. Rachel's departure had left a void in the house, but it also left room for something new, something I could build for myself. I started small, rearranging the furniture and packing away the last of Rachel's things. The throw pillows she loved, the decorative candles, even the picture frames that once held memories of us. All of it went into boxes. It wasn't about erasing her. It was about moving forward. One evening, as I was clearing out the spare bedroom, I stumbled upon a folder filled with papers from when we were trying to conceive. There were notes from doctor visits, cycle trackers, and even a list of potential baby names we'd made together. I sat on the floor, staring at the pages, the ache in my chest threatening to overwhelm me. This was supposed to be our future. A family, a life filled with love and laughter. Now it was just a pile of unfulfilled dreams. I took a deep breath and packed the folder away, vowing to revisit it only when I was ready. That weekend, Greg convinced me to join him and a few friends for a hiking trip. At first, I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to face the world outside my bubble of grief. But something about his insistence made me say yes. The hike was exactly what I needed. The crisp air and physical exertion cleared my mind, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. "You look better," Greg said as we reached the top of the trail, the view stretching out before us. "Thanks," I replied, smiling faintly. "I think I'm getting there." Back at home, I continued making changes. I painted the bedroom walls a deep navy, replacing the soft pastels Rachel had chosen. I bought new bedding, a new rug, and even a new set of plates for the kitchen. Each change felt like a step toward reclaiming my identity, a way to remind myself that my life wasn't over, It was just starting a new chapter. That night, as I sat on the back porch with a drink in hand, I felt a strange sense of peace. Rachel's betrayal had shattered my world, but it hadn't destroyed me. I wasn't the same person I was before, but maybe that wasn't a bad thing. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, I began to adjust to my new normal. Without Rachel, the house was quieter, but it was also calmer. The constant tension that had been building for months was gone, replaced by a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I needed. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects to keep my mind busy. My colleagues noticed the change. Greg, always perceptive, pulled me aside one afternoon. "You seem different," he said. "Different how?" "Lighter," he replied, smiling faintly. "Like you're starting to move on." I nodded, realizing he was right. The pain of Rachel's betrayal hadn't disappeared, but it was no longer the defining part of my day. I also started reconnecting with friends I'd unintentionally drifted away from during my marriage. One evening, I joined a group for trivia night at a local bar, something I hadn't done in years. At first, it felt strange, like I was stepping into a world I didn't belong in anymore. But as the night went on, I found myself laughing, enjoying the camaraderie. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. At home, I continued making changes. I cleared out the spare bedroom, turning it into a home office, a space just for me. I hung up photos from hiking trips and added shelves for the books I'd been meaning to read. Every small change felt like a step toward reclaiming my life. One day, while cleaning out a drawer, I found a letter Rachel had written to me years ago. It was from our first anniversary, filled with promises of a future together and declarations of love. I sat there for a long time, reading and rereading her words. It hurt to think about how far we'd fallen from that place, but it also made me realize something important. I couldn't keep holding on to what had been. I folded the letter and tucked it back into the drawer. It wasn't time to let it go entirely, but it was time to start looking forward. That evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Rachel's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also forced me to confront the parts of myself I'd neglected. I wasn't just mourning the end of my marriage. I was rediscovering who I was without it. Months passed, and with each day, the weight of Rachel's betrayal lifted a little more. It didn't vanish completely, scars like that don't fade overnight, but it no longer consumed me. The house, once a constant reminder of what I'd lost, now felt like my own. Every room reflected who I was, not who we had been. The navy walls in the bedroom, the shelves in the spare room, the new artwork in the living room, they were all small victories, symbols of my progress. One evening, Greg invited me to a casual gathering at his place. "It's low-key," he promised. "Just a few friends, good food, and even better company. You need this." I hesitated, but his insistence won me over. When I arrived, the backyard was alive with laughter and conversation. It felt good to be around people again, to feel a sense of normalcy. That's when I met Emily. She was one of Greg's old friends, introduced with a casual, "Mike, this is Emily. She's new in town." We struck up a conversation, talking about everything from her favorite hiking spots to the best hole-in-the-wall diners in the area. She was kind, genuine, and easy to talk to. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of connection. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I crossed paths again. Once at another gathering, then at a local cafe where she was reading a book I'd loved in college. Each encounter felt natural, unforced. One afternoon, we ended up hiking together, exploring a trail I hadn't been to since before Rachel left. "This place is incredible," Emily said, pausing to take in the view from a rocky overlook. "It is," I agreed, watching the way the sunlight caught her smile. She turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "You seem like someone who's been through a lot," she said softly. I hesitated, then nodded. "I have," I admitted, "but I'm getting through it." "You're doing more than that," she said with a gentle smile. "You're moving forward." That evening, as I sat on my porch with a drink in hand, I thought about Emily's words. She was right, I was moving forward. Rachel's betrayal had shattered me, but it hadn't destroyed me. I'd rebuilt myself, piece by piece, and though the scars remained, they were proof of my resilience. For the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace whatever came next. One evening, as I was organizing the garage, I stumbled upon a box of old keepsakes from my marriage with Rachel. Inside were photos, anniversary cards, and little mementos from trips we'd taken together. I hesitated for a long time before opening it. Part of me wanted to throw it all away, to rid myself of every reminder of her. But another part of me, curious, nostalgic, wanted to take one last look. The photos were the hardest to go through. There we were, smiling in front of the Grand Canyon, posing at a friend's wedding, and laughing at a Christmas party. Looking at them now, they felt like snapshots of a different life. Then I found a journal Rachel had kept early in our marriage. I flipped through it hesitantly, her handwriting filling the pages with thoughts and plans for our future. "I can't wait to start a family with Mike," one entry read. "He's going to be such an amazing dad." The words stung. They were a painful reminder of the love we'd once shared, of the life we were supposed to have. But instead of feeling anger, I felt closure. This was a chapter of my life that was over, and it was time to let it rest. That night, I packed the box away, tucking it in the corner of the garage. I wasn't ready to throw it out, but I also wasn't going to let it haunt me. A few weeks after packing away Rachel's keepsakes, I received a text message from an unfamiliar number. "Hi, Mike. It's Rachel. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I'm sorry. Truly. I hope you're doing okay." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave her words hanging in the air unanswered. But another part of me, the part that had started to heal, felt like this was an opportunity to close the door for good. After a deep breath, I typed out a reply. "Rachel, I appreciate your apology. What happened hurt deeply, but I'm moving forward. I hope you are too." Her response came quickly. "Thank you for saying that. I'll always regret what I did to you, and I'll always wish you the best." The conversation ended there, and I felt a strange sense of relief. Her words didn't erase the betrayal, but they gave me something I hadn't expected. Closure. Later that night, I shared the exchange with Greg over a beer. "She reached out?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," I said, nodding. I wasn't sure how to respond, but I think I handled it the right way. Greg leaned back in his chair, a satisfied look on his face. "You're doing good, man. Better than most would." His words stuck with me. For the first time, I felt like I was truly leaving the past behind. Weeks passed, and my life began to take on a rhythm that was entirely my own. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to build something with someone else. I was building something for myself. I picked up hobbies I'd long forgotten about. I started taking guitar lessons again, something I hadn't done since college. The familiar chords brought back memories of a simpler time, and for once, I wasn't playing to impress anyone. I was playing because it made me happy. One weekend, Greg convinced me to join him for a DIY project at his house. "You're handy, right?" he joked, handing me a toolbox. "Barely," I replied with a laugh, but as the hours passed, I found myself enjoying the simple act of working with my hands. We built a garden bench, and by the end of the day, I realized it was less about the bench and more about creating something from nothing. A metaphor, I supposed, for where I was in life. Later that week, I volunteered at a local youth center, helping to paint murals on the walls. As I stood there, brush in hand, surrounded by kids laughing and sharing their stories, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just reclaiming my life. I was finding ways to give back, to fill the gaps with something meaningful. One evening, I was sitting on the back porch, strumming my guitar, when I thought about Rachel. Not with anger, but with a strange sense of gratitude. Her betrayal had shattered the life I thought I wanted, but it had also forced me to rediscover the person I was beneath it all. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by how I had chosen to rise from it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself smiling, not because everything was perfect, but because I was finally at peace. The scars of the past were still there, but they had become part of a foundation I was proud to stand on. For the first time, I wasn't just moving forward. I was running toward a future I was excited to create. If you like our content, leave a like and subscribe for more videos.